I want to address the issue of Rohingya identity substantively, historically, officially, relying on primary historical and official Burmese language documentation. My primary sources include one of the earliest historical primary source published in the Royal Asiatic Society of Research out of Calcutta, written by Scottish medical doctor working for the British East India Company in 1790. His name was Dr. Francis Buchanan. He was by profession a medical doctor, but his passion was what we would call today ethno-linguistics. So he did field work as a member of the British East India Company at the time based in Calcutta. He traveled extensively in the country that was then known to the British as Burman Empire. Particularly, he focused on the distribution of ethnic groups and linguistic communities in then called, in the then Arakan state. He published his research paper in the proceedings of the Royal Asiatic Society in 1798. That's 9 years after the French Revolution, and 14 years after the Burmese conquest of the Arakan Buddhist nation or kingdom called Arakan or Rakhine Kingdom. So to date, Rakhine Buddhists do not celebrate Christian New Year, January 1st, because for them, that was the day their kingdom fell in 1785. And the year 1785 is pinned in the collective memories of all Rakhine people. And I came from a town called Mandalay. We have the most revered and famous Buddha image. To us, it is known as Mahamuni, the great image. And some of you who have been to Mandalay, this is a must stop for tourists. And for the Rakhines and others who are more historically minded, the image is known as Rakhine Buddha because that was the most important war loot that my own people brought back from Mra'u. Mra'u is tipped to become the next UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Rakhines wanted their fallen old capital to be declared World Heritage Site. This is important because it relates directly to 1982 Citizenship Act in the following way. 3 of the framers of 1982 Citizenship Act that was drafted and completed in October 1982 were either my personal friends or my friend's parents. I will name them. One was Dr. MAUNG, trained in the inner temple next to LSE in London, called to the bar, did his doctorate at Utrecht in law, and he held a visiting fellowship at Yale Law School for 2 years. And he was General Ne Win's legal advisor. And from late 1960s on, Dr. MAUNG was Revolutionary Council member, a member of Ne Win's cabinet. He chaired the Citizenship Drafting Committee on the order of Ne Win at the time, the chairman of the Burma Socialist Program Party. At Ne Win's official residence in AD Road, Rangoon, the Citizenship Drafting Committee convened an inaugural session where General Ne Win gave an opening remark and directives to the Citizenship Drafting Committee. Two other members who were part of this drafting committee were Rakhine nationalist intellectuals. One was a personal friend of mine who studied history and did his doctorate at Monash University in Australia. The other one was his fellow Rakhine nationalist named U San Ta Aw. He was Director General of Higher Education Department in the 1980s, just before I joined the university as a student. The two Rakhine nationalist members of this drafting committee wanted to use the year of the collapse of their Rakhine Kingdom, 1785. Dr. Mama, who was my friend's father, and we were from Mandalay, both of us. He was 2 generations older than me. Dr. Maman chaired the committee and offered a compromise because he was the legal mind behind 1982 citizenship law. And his compromise was that 1785 was too far. Why don't we use 1824 as the cutting year for who could become at birth citizen of Burma. 1824. That's, you calculate however many years. That's almost 180 years, 180 plus years. So that was the bar that the post-independent state of Socialist Republic of Burma set for the citizenship eligibility. I know that sovereignty enables governments to decide who would be accepted as citizens and who would not be accepted. Even today, some of the most oldest liberal states, such as UK, they can, with the pen of an executive order, strike off people from their citizens list. So I think international law is on the states to decide. It's the state's prerogative to decide who is citizen and who is not. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm not here to contest or argue otherwise. But what I wish to argue here is this. The 1982 citizenship law is one of the most important instruments of repression, disempowerment, disenfranchisement, and ultimately genocide behind the current events that the United Nations officials and leaders call ethnic cleansing. But I argue it is a genocide because to digress very briefly, the popular understanding, or I would say misunderstanding of genocide, is all about mediagenic blood and horrid stories of people fleeing. But in fact, if you read the original framer of the term genocide, the late Polish Jewish lawyer Raphael Lemkin, who survived the Holocaust himself, genocide has 2 parts, and most of the distinguished scholars of genocide know this for a fact. But for the public, the genocide has 2 parts, and both parts are anchored on the identity of the group. People are killed, they're driven out of home, their lives are destroyed, their lands confiscated, Their women raped, not as individual humans. Therefore, crimes against humanity is utterly inadequate to address this issue. It does not capture the essence and the materiality of the crime. People are killed because they belong to this group, whatever the name, whether the state recognizes their name or the state imposes another name on them is immaterial. What is material, what is consequential, is that these people who call themselves Rohingya, whom the Burmese racist state call and the public call as Bengalis, they are killed because of their identity. Simply because of their identity, they have been killed. They have been driven out. Close to 1 million, or perhaps even more, over the last 39 years. Now onto the issue of the validity of Rohingyas' claim that they are who they are. They are who they claim they are, Rohingya, not Bangladeshi, not Bengali. We need to bear in mind two things. No identity is set in stone. Most of you who have studied nationalism would know the name Benedict O.G. Anderson. I audited a course with Ben at Cornell back in 1994 fall. And I knew the man who coined the most famous book title, Imagined Communities. Ben would say, Ben Anderson, identities, national or otherwise, are imagined. They are imagined, product of imagined collective memories and active preservation of those memories. And so I would not say that there are no Chittagonians that did not come to form what the Rohingyas call Rohingya community. Because as I said yesterday, these are borderland communities whose presence and existence and histories are binational, politically speaking. So the identities cannot be treated as blood-based. That will be fascist. The blood-based notion of identity ended in major catastrophe. Most people in this room and those watching know, Holocaust. The Nazism, I would say what Rohingya face today are worse than what the Nazi victims, particularly of Jewish community, faced. The Jews were killed as Jews. They were de-Germanized. They were stripped of basic rights and citizenship. But the German state never denied that they were Jews. Today, we have a situation where the victims died, were killed, driven out, not as Rohingyas, not as who they are, but as somebody else. It's like, to bring it to the street level, it's like, people calling me a dog, establishing me as a dog falsely, whereas if I am flesh and blood, and so psychologically in my head, I know I am a human being. So the Rohingyas died trying to prove that they are humans, while their killers pursue them as dogs. So this is all related to identity. And so now returning to the historical evidence. Like I said, in 1789, Francis Buchanan unequivocally, in a primary historical document he himself wrote and published, Rohingya, the word Rohingya, and they were identified as Mohammedans, followers of Prophet Muhammad, or Muslims as we would say today. So in 1798, primary historical evidence established unequivocally Rohingyas were natives of Arakan, and that they were Mohammedans. So bear that in mind. Rohingya identity, though an imagined product, was locked in the primary historical literature as a reified reality, real. And that identity was not entered into the colonial era censuses. That is one of the things that the Burmese, one of the very, very few things that the Burmese government latches onto, to say that because the Rohingyas were not mentioned in any historical documentations about the demography of the Arakan, they don't exist. Well, in the 19th century, the European understanding of identity is pseudo-scientific and racist. The British collected censuses not to establish truths about people, not to collect facts, but to use whatever they can generate as facts on the ground in order to enable themselves to rule over the population, to control the population effectively. The key word here is population. Genocide is not about individuals. Genocide is about populations. Populations with racial, ethnic, national, and religious identities. And in this case, my testimony would unreservedly argue the attack on the Rohingya identity and the attack on the physical body of a population recognized as Rohingya by themselves, recognized by the UN as Rohingya, recognized by the world outside as Rohingya, but being referred to officially in Burma and in the popular discourses as Bengali. So this is a circular narrative here. And then this speaks to Lemkin's two parts genocide. One is destruction of the identity. The other is imposing the identity that the perpetrators, the genocidal killers, policymakers impose on the victims who are left standing after waves of death and destruction. But one small qualification or modification I need to make is that, although Raphael Lemkin mentioned that the imposition, the second part, the other 50% of the genocidal act, it was done sequentially. In the Burmese case, we commit this Lemkinian genocidal destruction concurrently. While we are killing and driving them out, we are imposing our identity, you see, on the dead Rohingyas as well as those who are still alive. So this, and in 1948, we regained our independence. The first, or the original Constitution and Citizenship Act that is a part of it, was to be understood in a larger context of the British India being dissolved. There were in the Indian Congress, there were in Parliament with the Nehru's and Gandhi's Indian Congress. There were discussions about who would become full-fledged citizens after new boundaries were redrawn as the direct result of the British decision to give up India to give up the auxiliary states of India. Burma was annexed to India in 1886, January 1st. Then in the 1930s, we were split from India, and London dealt with Burmese nationalists directly. So to make the long story short, the discussions that took place between the British and people like Gandhi and Nehru about the status of who would become citizens after the British left mirror the discussions that took place within the Burmese nationalist community. The direct result of these discussions and negotiations in the British-controlled Parliament after the World War II is the 1947 Constitution. The Constitution granted anyone who was physically present as residents of British Burma 12 years before Burma became independent in 1948. So this was retroactive recognition of all residents of Burma, irrespective of race, faith, religion, political affiliations. And fast forward, so in the 1950s, several years after independence of Burma, the Union of Burma government at the time, led by Prime Minister U Nu, initiated a pilot program to issue citizenship identity cards. That was the very first time in the history, in the recorded history of Burma, including colonial era, from 1824 to 1947 or 48, that a political entity that controls the populations of the country issued a national identity card. And that identity card made no mention of race or faith, except that the identity card would mention father's name. It's like Scandinavian system. Johnson becomes Johnson. You know, Johansson becomes Johansson, son of Johan, son of John. Because the Burmese society and culture does not have a naming system. Women do not take husbands' names after marriage. Children do not take father's name. For that matter, mother's name. So we do not have a systematized system of naming that would enable anyone to trace their lineage the way the Chinese civilization had. So the Chinese, if you've got Chan, and there are Chans over 3,000 years, at some point they're all related, or they're all from the same village or same clan. We don't have that. And now to the cutting year of 1824 for 1982 Citizenship Act. Back in 1824, Burma was no different from Cambodia or Thailand. In that, we were known as essentially palm leaf societies. All the records, including royal orders coming out of the palace, were recorded on dried palm leaves with gold lettering. My fifth generation grandfather was the chief archivist at the palace before the fall of Mandalay. I can speak with authority on the subject of our society's reliance on palm leaf. The printing press did not arrive in Burma until 1817. It was brought by the Christian missionaries because they wanted to spread the gospel in writing and on paper. So, Your Honors, we are talking about a society that never had identity cards, not even on palm leaves when it comes to national registration. Back in 1824. And yet, Rohingyas are legally required, with the popular backing, that they provide documentation to establish that their ancestors settled in Burma before the first British annexation of that narrow, fertile agricultural land, coastal land next to the Bay of Bengal, we call today Rakhine, Western Burma. Yeah? Most importantly, one of the framers of 1982 citizenship, Rakhine historian named Dr. Ajo, he was a friend of mine. We were both exiled in the United States. He gave an interview to the Burmese language version of Irrawaddy News Group that is based in, or that used to be based in Chiang Mai, that is now operating out of Rangoon. And Irrawaddy, incidentally, is today cheerleading, run by Exile Group before, and now still the same people. They are cheerleading in the popular effort to deny that Rohingyas are people, or that they are victims of this ethnic cleansing or genocide. But Dr. Ajo, in his interview in Irrawaddy, before he passed away several years ago, articulated the rationale from the Rakhine's perspective behind 1982 citizenship law. They wanted to make sure that Rohingya presence identity was delegitimized and completely erased from the collective memory and from the body of law. So 1982 citizenship law did not pop up from nowhere. It cannot be understood unless we put that in the context of the first large-scale assault on Rohingyas that began on 12th of February 1978. The great irony here is 12th February has been celebrated annually as the Union Day. That is the day that the treaty known as Panglong or Pinlong was signed between Aung San Suu Kyi's father and the leaders of frontier regions, ethnic regions, borderland regions. So on the day that was to celebrate the diversity, the equality of ethnic people before law, the Burmese military launched the centrally organized, not from Rakhine. This is no mere product of communal violence or conflict. General Ne Win and his top deputies organized the assault, the very first assault on the Rohingya community. They made one mistake. That mistake was, before they destroyed the Rohingyas symbolically, they attempted to destroy the Rohingya in the physical sense. Soldiers, immigration officers, religious affairs officials, customs officials, special branch, military intelligence in the field, regular infantry troops. It started out with only 200-man operation. That was later and fast, joined by the local Rakhine population that had an axe to grind against the Rohingya. But the lead was the state, the military-controlled state, the government of the Socialist Republic of Burma at the time. On February 12, 1978, attempted to destroy the Rohingya group in part or in whole, physically, in the physical sense of destruction. So, close to 280,000 Rohingya resumed the attacks on the Rohingya, lasted until the end of June. So almost 280,000. If you look at the journalistic writings, the figures given were about 220. I have a book written by one of the key commanders that led that operation in 1978. He rose to serve as the chief of military intelligence for 25 years. His name is General Kin Yong. I used to work with him when I was trying to facilitate Burmese military's negotiations with several countries, key countries in Europe and North America. This man, relying on military intelligence archives, gave the number close to 280,000. So, honorable panel of judges, what we just saw over the last 3 weeks is just a part of this long pattern of waves after waves of not 10,000, not 100,000. On average, every 10 years, my country, the military, named Tamador, has been driving Rohingyas out, destroying their communities physically. Like I said, because in 1978, they did not tell the world, or the Burmese public, that Rohingyas were not our people and they were interlopers, illegal migrants, or descendants of the British colonial era agricultural seasonal workers who decided not to go home because Burma was land of milk and honey. That was the story that they now tell the world. That is the story that Aung San Suu Kyi repeats to the world. So because...
So Sandy, one minute. You are dealing with a very crucial point for the tribunal. So probably we will have, at least I have, and we will have a lot of questions. And we have other very important expert witness for this session.
Yeah.
So I would ask you if you can summarize and finish in 2-3 minutes to give us the possibility to a lot of questions we have regarding these fundamental issues.
Yeah. When the Burmese government successively, over the last 25 years, said Rohingyas do not exist. We don't have a group called Rohingya. Every single head of state, every single home minister, every single ambassador that is asked this question, are Rohingyas your citizen? They will tell you categorically that they are Rohingya. We do not have Rohingya as a group. And I would say emphatically, from Aung San Suu Kyi down to the street level people who say Rohingya do not exist, they are either outrightly, categorically lying in the face of mountain historical official documents. And finally, were they illegal? Were they someone else other than Bangladesh? The discourse inside the country, popular and official, was that in the democracy period, parliamentary democracy period from 1948 to 1962, the Rohingyas were given some provisional recognition as Rohingyas, that they were allowed to vote, because the Prime Minister Ulu wanted the Rohingyas vote. Well, mathematically, this is utterly inconceivable. In a democratic politic, in an electoral system, politicians always play to the majority. Rohingyas are outnumbered in Arakan state 3-1 by Buddhist Rakhine. If Ulu wanted votes, he would appease the Buddhist majority, as Aung San Suu Kyi has over the last 5 years to get where she is today, to get a majority vote. So, but finally, the strongest, irrefutable argument or evidence that Rohingyas were officially recognized as both citizens, political citizens of Burma, and a constituent, ethnic, let me repeat, ethnic group of the Union of Burma. That came from the Ministry of Defense publication named Current Affairs, from Ne Win's number 2 man named Brigadier General Aung Ji. He recognized the borderland nature of identities. He accepted Rohingyas as having bicultural roots. He called them our own people. This was published on 4th of July 1961. And my own great uncle, finally, was made in charge of the Rohingya district, predominantly Rohingya district named MAUNG district. And Aung San Suu Kyi's vice chair, former defense minister and commander-in-chief under General Ne Win in 1974, named retired General Tin U. He is now in his early 90s. He has also repeatedly denied that Rohingyas were our people, whereas in fact, he was the one who set up the MAUNG district. So I think, Your Honors, the case to support the Rohingya claims that they are both fully fledged citizens, an ethnic group of Burma, is irrefutable. And I think if we take into consideration Lemkin's original conception of what genocide is, the attack on the group because of who they are, we have a case, we have a full genocide that is slow burning with massive waves of spikes of direct killings. That is what we are witnessing, nothing less. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Zarni. A very detailed presentation, very useful. So I have some questions, and I would appreciate if you had some concise answers to follow the situation, because at least in my opinion, and regarding the discussion of how long is the Rohingya presence in Myanmar, in my opinion, it doesn't matter if they were there in the 18th century, but anyone has the right to citizenship beyond this racist thinking that how long are you in the soil, which is difficult to prove, in other words. So, you presented the 1947 Constitution and this decision to give citizenships to anyone who was in the territory 12 years before independence. That's correct?
That's correct.
So, did the government give documents, ID cards? Because you mentioned that for the first time in the history of Myanmar there were identity cards. So did the government give documents to any kind of citizens that were recognized as citizens because they were there 12 years before independence? So
yes.
Some Rohingya population had identity cards as part of this population due to the Constitution of 1947. The first time the identity cards were issued was on a pilot basis. And the Rohingyas, like other communities, were also issued identity cards. What I stated emphatically earlier was there was no mention of race or faith, only the name, father's name, the address. And so the many Rohingyas from that generation could provide that documentation, and
And so yes, my answer is yes. Rohingyas did have documentation as citizens. National identification card.
That's the question. Of course, not all of them as in any other country, because probably in rural areas there were some people in different ethnic groups without documents. But my question was answered. So some Rohingya received documents due to this decision of the Constitution of 1947. So then, what is unclear to me is between 1947 and 1982, there were any other administrative decision on identity or ID cards, or the first transformation was this 1982 Act on identity. So what happened between 1947, 1948, 1982?
Can you help? I want to get to this page. No, don't. What happened between 1947, or like January 4th, 1948, the day of independence, until the 12th of, until 1982, was that Rohingyas were allowed to hold parliamentary elected office. Rohingyas were allowed to hold positions in the state bureaucracies, as well as Rohingyas were allowed to serve in the security forces. If, Your Honors, as you know, being allowed to serve in a country's security forces is the ultimate form of acceptance, yeah, in any country in the world. So, and they were allowed to vote. As a matter of fact, Rohingyas were allowed to vote even after 1982 Citizenship Act was enacted. But post-1982, the Burmese government, or the military's approach to Rohingya, particularly once they start playing electoral politics as the direct result of 88 uprisings, 1980 uprising, was more akin to the American South, where black people were constitutionally considered three-fifths human beings, but the plantation owners needed to compete for electoral representation. They counted the slaves as if they were humans, because until 2010, Rohingyas were allowed to vote. That's how many years after 1982. But they were issued